Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Our next presenter is Mr. Charles Hall. I don't know Charles very well, but in the short time that I have known him, I'll share my opinion of him. Folks, he's an honest man. He's a Joe Friday kind of guy, nothing but the facts, ma'am. His story about his experiences out in the desert with the tall whites has never changed. It remains the same. Wonder why that is. I think it's because he's come to tell us some truth. Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Hall.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You have me at some disadvantage because with these bright lights, you can see me and I can't see you. So I'll put my laser pointer here and my notes here. And as you see, I'm Charles Hall, the author of the Millennial Hospitality Series. And I'd like to begin by thanking the people who were kind enough to invite me, the people who put on the UFO Congress, Wendell Stevens. I'd like to thank Paula Harris for the nice presentation that she gave and for the nice things that she said about me in her talk. And I'd also like to thank Sandy James, who runs the Roswell gift shop, the Roswell Museum in Roswell, New Mexico. She invited me to present there back, and that's how I came to meet Paula. So I'd like to thank all of those people, and and I appreciate everything that they've done for me. There were a few other people that I'd like to thank. I've been on a number of radio talk shows, and I also wish to thank those people. Sweeps Royden Fox from Ireland, George Norrie on the Coast to Coast show. Those were shows that I've done. Scott Colburn and Howard Hughes. You can see on the screen their URLs, and so I won't bother reading them off. You can read them yourselves and take notes as you wish. I also would like to thank Jeff Rensey and Tony Gill and Kevin Smith and Out There TV. In addition, I want to point out that I will be speaking at the X Conference April 22nd and through the 24th. The X Conference will be held in the Washington, D.C. area. I'm told it'll be at the Bethesda Hilton. Attendees of this conference who register for the X Conference, or you can register for the X Conference at a table in the vendor area if you choose. And they have an iUFO conference special. You can get up to 3 X Conference 2004 DVDs with the registration. And so, and I'd like to thank anyone that I may have forgotten about because I am kind of nervous while I'm up here. I'll continue with my biography. I'll start now with my biography. I was born in Wisconsin, and I come from a very poor family. And I graduated from high school in the class of 1962, the last good class. You know, it peaked and then it was all downhill from there. And I attended the University of Wisconsin on a scholarship for a year and a half before I went in the service. The University of Wisconsin is the classic ivory tower university, and it's very expensive. And I got sick and ran out of money, and so I had to drop out in the spring of '64 to go work to support myself. I was going to be drafted, And so to beat the draft, I enlisted in the U.S. Air Force on July 24th, 1964. I know there's better ways to beat the draft, but that was mine. And I was stationed at Chanute. I did my basic training at Lackland Air Force Base at San Antonio, Texas. And then I was sent to weather training school at Chanute Air Force Base, Illinois, which is in Illinois. And in March of 1965, I was sent to Nellis Air Force Base, which is on the northeast side of Las Vegas, Nevada. I spent something over 2 years at Nellis. I stayed there until the 7th of May, 1967. I spent most of that time out in the Nellis gunnery ranges at Indian Springs, Nevada. And Indian Springs is about 90 miles northwest of Las Vegas. And I was where I was the range weather observer. The material, my experiences at Indian Springs are related in my 3-book series, Millennial Hospitality. Everything in the books is true. I changed only the names of the people and the places to protect the innocent, one of whom is me. Okay. On May 7th, 1967, I was sent to Vietnam. I served there for a year in the Mekong Delta with the South Vietnamese. And I received an award for defending in 37 communist attacks. And when I came back from Vietnam on the 8th of May, 1968, I had less than 3 months remaining on my term of enlistment. I was an enlisted man, and I had enlisted for 4 years. The Air Force had a policy that because of the expenses involved in assigning an airman to a base, if a person had less than 3 months remaining on their enlistment, they could receive an honorable discharge early, and so I took that. I went back to the University of Wisconsin, got sick again, ran out of money again, and then I met my wife, Marie, and we got married in November 22nd, 1969. And then we moved out to California, where I attended Sierra Junior College and got an associate's degree. Then I attended California State University at San Diego, where I received a bachelor's degree in physics, in thermal physics, and a master's degree in nuclear physics. I also attended a PhD program at the University of Maine in Orono, but you know, I wasn't getting any younger, and they were going to take forever to give me one, so I broke up. So I quit the PhD program and went back to work. Over the course of the years since then, I've received the Master's in Business Administration from Nova Southeastern University at Fort Lauderdale. And currently I'm an expert in a computer expert. I'm an expert in Oracle databases and all kinds of computer databases. And also I know all the computer languages, and that's how I'm currently employed. When I first told Marie, my wife, about my experiences out at Indian Springs, about the tall white extraterrestrials that are out there, she said that what she cared about was how she should behave if she met one. And that in essence is one of the topics, I guess, one of the themes that you see in my books. It's the protocol of what I had to do, how it came to be that I was the weather observer that stayed. To begin with, Indian Springs, Nevada, you'll see on this map. I have Jerry Zeitlin to thank for this map. Indian Springs is 90 miles or so northwest of Las Vegas. And on this topographical map, you'll see that it's the little town down towards the bottom. I won't go into the details on this map at this time. what I intend to do is to give a reasonably short presentation, a half hour, 45 minutes, and then to open up the microphone, which is next to me, and let you ask questions. And at that time, if necessary, I can come back to this map if the question requires it. The gunnery ranges are quite large. The point of the map is that they're just across the mountains from Area 51. When you look at the map, those mountains that I have circled with the blue ellipse, those are areas 54 and 53. And those areas are Area 54 and Area 53, and the mountains on the eastern side of Indian Springs Valley, the Desert Game Range, those are the areas that are actually called Dreamland. Here's a picture of that area taken from the air by Frontier Airlines Captain David Coote. And you may remember seeing this map in Paula's presentation as well. It shows Dogbone Lake on the right side of the picture. And the rectangle identifies the mountain where the main hangar entrance is on the alien base. Likewise, I won't go through everything about this map at this picture at this time, but as people have questions, it's there for me to come back to. Incidentally, that last picture showed the mountains in Area 54 and Area 53. It was a picture of the area that is actually Dreamland. I know a lot of it's common nowadays to refer to everything in Area 51 as Dreamland. But when I was there in 1965 and 66 and early 67, Area 51 wasn't Dreamland. Area 51 was Groom Lake. It was also so secret that it was never talked about. In this picture here, which is also taken by Captain David Coote, you'll notice that it's a picture of Dogbone Lake. Dogbone Lake is the alien deep spacecraft landing area. Notice that it's perfect as a landing area for deep spacecraft for gravity-driven deep spacecraft to land on when they come into the Earth from outer space. It's desolate, it's empty, it's flat, it's easily seen. And the hangar entrance is northwest of Dogbone Lake. The alien spacecraft did not, if everything was normal, if the craft were running fine, they did not actually touch down at Dogbone Lake. Usually they would come down until they were at the same altitude as the hangar entrance. They only touched down if they were in some kind of trouble or needed to make some kind of adjustment before heading off to the hangar. And likewise, this is a picture that we can come back to during the question and answer session. First, there's the question of the physical description of Dogbone Lake, of the Tall Whites. Before I do it, I'll tell one more little story about Dreamland, which we've seen on our pictures. The first time that I personally ever heard tell of Dreamland was in late 1965 and in that time frame, when I received my orders, my orders to be the range weather observer. Originally, the weather observers at Nellis rotated. Each weather observer in turn would spend 6 weeks at Indian Springs on temporary duty. And then after 6 weeks, another weather observer would go up and so on. During the 7 years before I got to Nellis, or before I started my service at Indian Springs, I estimate that at least 41 weather observers before me were sent up there in turn, and they had been compromised. Some were terrified by what they found out in the ranges and wouldn't go out there. They would stay in the chow hall and make up the winds, and then pretend they were out there. A few had been so terrified that they went into Nellis and they were reassigned to friendlier places like England or Hawaii. Some had been burned or physically attacked and were given medical discharges. After my first tour of duty, another weather observer replaced me, and he was compromised. And so they sent me back to replace him. And then after I finished that tour of duty, they sent another weather observer, and he was compromised. He was the one that was burned and given a medical discharge. And so then the American generals and the tall white aliens, their generals, they formed a committee, and they decided that they would pick one weather observer and just send him all the time, win, lose, or draw. And so as a committee vote, they picked me. You know, it would have been nice if they'd told me, but you know, I was only an enlisted man. Why be told anything, right? They're generals. Who's got the time? And so they made up a special set of orders. Nothing I did was ever classified, although the orders that I received were highly classified. The day the major gave me the orders, I was ordered to work day shift. It was a Sunday at Nellis. And on Sundays, the Nellis weather station is pretty deserted. Only the weather observer is usually in the weather station. The other end of the building that the weather station is in, the base operations building, is closed. And so there was just me. And the major came in at noon. The Nellis base commander and the Nellis number 2 man came in at noon as well. My commanding officer was ordered to report to the Nellis base commander's office at noon sharp and pick up my orders. Then he was escorted, 2 MPs, armed of course, escorted him over to the weather station. And then right after I'd finished the noon report, the major came in with my orders. The MP stayed outside in the truck. The major locked all the doors and sat me down and began reading my orders. And he said I was cleared to go to Dreamland anytime I wanted, day or night. I thought he meant that it was okay if I slept on duty. You know? Yeah. He went on saying, no, anywhere I went, I could go anywhere I wanted, but I had to be alone. If someone else were with me, I wouldn't be in any trouble, but the person with me might be shot, okay? And I thought, well, I know what to do with the guys I don't like, yeah, okay? When he had finished, he said, do I have any questions? And I said, thinking that Dreamland meant I could sleep on duty, I said, will there be a bunk out in the weather shack, you know? And he looked a little confused and said it was his understanding that Dreamland was a place, but that only I would know where that place was. He himself didn't know where it was. And so then I signed that I'd received my orders. He kept a piece of paper in the safe where he stored top secret documents. That piece of paper only said that I had received my orders. It didn't say anything else. And then I signed the orders themselves, and then he had to hand carry them with the MPs escorting him back to the Nellis Base Commander's office, where they were sent back to the Pentagon. And that was the very first time that I ever heard tell of Dreamland. And going on to a physical description of the tall whites that I found that are out in Dreamland, I found that there was a base out there which the U.S. Air Force maintains purely for the tall whites. Up on those mountains, there's towards about a third of the way up those mountains, there's an outer perimeter, and the Air Force guards, the U.S. Air Force maintains that outer perimeter. Then there's an inner perimeter, which the alien guards maintain. Everything inside the inner perimeter is treated just like an alien embassy. It's whatever they want it to be. What's out there is there's up towards the top of the mountain, there's a main hangar entrance where their deep spacecraft arrive on schedule, are typically in port for 2 weeks where they're repaired and refueled and refurbished, and then they stand out to space again. And what the base does is it services the deep spacecraft. The deep spacecraft typically arrive at sundown on the night of the full moon. That's because the deep spacecraft use anti-gravity propulsion. They're typically in port for 2 weeks, and then they typically leave at midnight on the night of the new moon. And that's because they use gravity propulsion. On the night of the moon is between the Earth and the sun. At midnight, you're on the outside of the Earth as it travels in its orbit around the sun, and there's nothing in front of you. So when they take off, they can power up and take off as quickly as they want, much like an airplane coming off the front of an aircraft carrier. On the other hand, at sundown on the night of the new moon, at sundown you're on the part of the Earth that trails the Earth in its orbit. The Earth is moving away from you at sundown. And the moon is on your right, and the sun is on your left if you're landing with north towards the top. And therefore the gravity field is smooth without bumps. And so it's like an airplane landing on an aircraft carrier, since they're gravity powered, and the large deep spacecraft are not very maneuverable at slow speed. It allows them to just come in for speeds that are slow for them. Slow might be 8,000 miles an hour, because the spacecraft do travel faster than the speed of light, and until they come to altitude. And when I was out there with my theodolite watching them, it's like being at an airport, watching them arrive and leave on schedule. The tall whites themselves have skin that is as white as a piece of paper. Now, people frequently ask me why I never took a picture of a tall white. As you see here, I do have a picture of a tall white. It's the picture of my wife on her wedding day. And she's floating over the crowd and making me disappear, you know, so it's as close, you know, that's what a picture is. When I was out there among them, or more properly, when they came to be among me, my first concern was my own personal safety. As you see in my books, it took more than 6 months for me to get over the fear that I felt when they came, even though they had not come to harm me. They came because they were bored. They have men and women and children. They get bored out on the base. I'm the weather observer. I have pretty colored balloons with lights on them. I have a theodolite that's fun to look through. And the children like to play. And it took me more than 6 months to get over the fear, the terror, the self-doubt, the denial. There were days that I thought I was nuts, and there were other days that I, you know, thought I was seeing ghosts or angels, other days that I thought I was dreaming. As I describe in book 1 and book 2, there were days when, you know, I left the ranges in fear. It took me more than 6 months to get to where I was just willing to stand there and let them walk in on me. One day I was sitting at the doorway of my Range 3 weather shack. The alien teacher, lady whose CIA name was the teacher, and the kids were playing. And so as usual, they posted a guard on me. They had Range 4 Harry himself take up a position that was physically northwest of my Range 3 weather shack, but on this side of the Range 3 Lounge building that was out there, and just stand there the way a guard would to make sure that I didn't accidentally go over to the sagebrush where the teacher and the children were playing and disturb them. And I remember I was sitting there as he took up his position, and of course he looked perfectly real because he was perfectly real. And I remember I was struggling with it. And I got up and I walked slowly over towards him until I was 10 feet or so from him. And I said to him in English, I said, "You're real, aren't you?" And he said to me, he said in English, he was very proud of the fact that he spoke perfect English. He said, "I am as real as you are." And I really didn't know what to do. You know, my brain really wasn't able to process it. I expected, you know, I mean, even my hallucinations now are talking back to me, you know? And I didn't know what to do. I backed away a little bit and I turned around and I went back and I didn't sit down at the front door of my range shack, my weather shack. It was raised and off the desert. I went back inside thinking, well, maybe if I go back inside, you know, in the shade and rest a while, then maybe I'll return to normal, you know? You know, I've gotten, you know, the heat must be getting to me, you know? The tall whites, the tall whites look human, although when you look at them, it's obvious that they are not human. Their bodies and bones are thinner and more frail than a human body. One day, Range 4 Harry was walking through some of the soft dirt over by the Range 3 Lounge, and I went over and I measured the depths of his footprints after he had left, and I estimate that he weighed between 90 and 110 pounds, even though he is as tall as I am. I'm 5'11". Their skin is as white as a piece of paper, but it otherwise looks like human skin. They don't have, or reasonably close, they don't have hair on their arms. They have way less hair than a human, and when you're up very close to them, like a few feet, it looks almost like an albino human. It's a human with just completely chalk white skin. You don't see their veins. Their veins and arteries do not show as different colors, although they do bulge somewhat on the older men. They're more frail than we are. Their thumbs are only about half as long as a human thumb, and their fingers are longer than a human thumb and way more flexible. And their hands and arms, they're not built for grasping and pulling like ours are. You know, ours are built to go out and, you know, grab that bale of hay and tote that log, and, you know, theirs aren't real strong like that. There's also a slight difference in the way their bones are built around their hips, and when they walk, they do walk noticeably different than a human. They shuffle more, and it takes them a while to get used to the Earth's gravity field. So new arrivals especially walk very carefully. One night when I was out there, I saw one of the older men, he wasn't really an older man. He was more or less equivalent to a man 40, 45. At my age, that's very young, I guess. And he was obviously a new arrival, and like many new arrivals, he was out walking in the desert, getting used to the Earth's gravity field, which apparently is much lighter than the gravity field on their home planet. And he was walking as though he were walking on lily pads, you know, clomp, 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 you know, very carefully, you know. After they get used to the Earth's gravity field, especially the young adults, then they walk in a more fluid fashion, but there's always a noticeable difference between the way they walk and the way a human walks. Their eyes are larger than the eyes on a human, although their eyes are just like our eyes. You know, they're blue and white, and their eyes do stretch noticeably further around the sides of their head than human eyes. Their eyes are blue for both men and women when they're young adults. As they get older, the whites of their eyes turn successively a deeper shade of pink. especially in the men. Now, they live much longer than humans. They live approximately 10 times longer than humans. And so an alien who is equivalent in age to a human that is 39, 40 years old is roughly 400 years old. As they get old, when they get older, they do not age as we age. Instead, they begin growing again. Throughout much of their adult life, they're the same height that I am, 5'11", 6 feet, in there. But when they get about 40 years old, give or take, roughly, then they begin growing again, and therefore they become taller, which is why I call them the tall whites. That's my name for them. These, as they get successively older, they go through successive growth periods. But this is not necessarily beneficial because their organs do not grow in proportion to their body. Their bones and their skeletons grow, but their organs do not grow proportionally. So they become more frail. By the time they get 8.5, 9 feet tall, somewhere in there, anything above 8 feet, I seldom saw one that tall who was not also accompanied by a younger adult whose job it was to steady them and look after them. Eventually there comes a growth period when they're 8.5 or 9 feet tall, when their body outgrows the ability of their organs to support it. And at that time they die, just like we die. One night when I was taking the morning run, I was looking at one of the tall white men who was standing next to the control tower, which was out at range 3. And I noted where the top of his head matched up with one of the crossboards. Later in the day, I went out and measured his height, and he was 8.5 feet tall. He was still in reasonably good health. He was still out there by himself. But it was obvious that, he was a very old, one of the very old ones. You see, as a weather observer, it was my duty to get up every morning at 3 o'clock, Monday through Friday, and drive my truck out to range 3 and set up for a 4:30 a.m. balloon release. I would fill up a weather balloon, which has the unusual name Pieball, and fill it with helium to a measured amount, and put on a battery with a light, and take it out to the theodolite stand, which was out in front of my weather shack, release it precisely at 4:30, track it with my theodolite for 10 or 12 minutes, or however long was appropriate, depending on the weather, typically 12 minutes, and record those readings on a clipboard and a piece of paper, a weather report, and then to go back to my weather shack and do some computations using a large ivory table and appropriate instruments that went with that. And then once I knew the winds, for example, the wind at 2,000 feet might be out of the southwest at 5 miles an hour, the winds at 3,000 feet might be out of the southwest at 7, and so on. Then using a telephone in the weather shack to phone Nellis and give them the morning report. Then out at range 3, there were 4 ranges and I had 4 weather shacks. Out at range 3, for example, there were more buildings. They formed a square with gravel in the middle. As I describe in my books, there was a generator shack that had 2 diesel generators in it. There was another building that was a lounge that I called the range 3 lounge. There was a control tower, there was an outhouse, there was range boards, and there were also the skip bomb area and so on, as I describe in my books. There were also 2 supply sheds. In the supply sheds, there was a gasoline-driven electrical generator that the Air Force had put there for my use, but it was too small. I wanted to go start the diesel engines. They were 12 cylinders, If I used the gasoline engine, I'd have to bring out my own gasoline, but if I use the diesel engine, I can tell the guys in POL to come fill the tanks, And so I always used the diesel generator. And then when people would say, well, Charlie, how do you keep your gasoline engine looking so new and clean? I'd say, well, I clean it regularly. Really, I'd never run it. It was right out of the box. And yeah. The tall whites, especially the young adults who are my height, can easily dress up to look like humans. The teacher, her favorite disguise was to dress up and look like a nurse. She loved doing it. She thought it was great fun, to pretend she was a nurse. She had white clothes, white skin. Isn't that what nurses have? It was easy for them to put on wigs, and their noses are much smaller than human noses, and their ears are much smaller than human ears. But if the teacher put on a wig and covered up her ears, and and their lips, by the way, they are much thinner than human lips. And they don't have teeth, they have ridges because they're plant eaters. They don't eat anything meat. When their clothes do not include wool or animal hair, their clothes are always like cotton or nylon or things of that nature. And the teacher and the young men can easily dress up to look like humans, although the older adults who get like 7.5 or 8 feet tall naturally cannot disguise their height. So it was on the young adults. It was common to see the young adults who had learned English and had overcome their fear of humans and knew how to blend in. As I describe in my books, it was common to see them in the city of Las Vegas, Nevada, especially at night, like on Sunday morning and stuff. They never came alone. They always came in groups. And they typically came with their CIA guards. And so when you saw them in a casino, if you looked around, you'd also find the human guards the CIA had provided for them. And they like to do it for entertainment. They get very bored when they're out there in the desert. They're just like we are, If we came across 36 light years of space and somebody told us to stay on 37 acres of rock, along about the second year, we'd be climbing out of our skulls with boredom. And they're much like us in that regard. Although they naturally stand and walk similar to humans, their walk is somewhat different. And one of the ways I used to pick them out of the crowds, or used to see them in the crowds in Las Vegas, is by picking a position where the crowd was silhouetted against some distant lights, and then just watching how the people in the crowd were walking. And that was much easier. It was much simpler to identify them by that technique than it was to walk around and see who looked different. In Las Vegas, Nevada on Saturday night, everybody looks different. Some of those guys have been gambling and drinking, so they look very different. So the way they walked was, watching how the crowd walked was one of the habits that I developed. Lastly, their hair is thin. The hair on top of their head is much thinner than a human. They have only about half as much hair as a human does. It's almost transparent. So in their natural state, when you'd see them out in the desert on a bright sunshiny day, they looked like platinum blondes, or maybe even like they didn't have any hair at all. Their nervous system runs much faster than ours. I estimated that their nervous system ran 2.5 or 3 times faster than mine. Perhaps it was faster than that, but they were much quicker than we are. As I describe in book 1, the night that I saw the teacher and the 3 children in Range 4 Harry, they had been in my barracks where I bunked alone and I was sleeping, in the chapter entitled Olympic Tryouts. The night that I saw them run out into the desert northwest from my barracks and right in Indian Springs, I timed the teacher. She was running with the children between 27 and 30 miles an hour, and she did that for more than 3 miles. Range 4 Harry himself on that night ran out at almost 35 miles an hour, and he ran out that same 3 miles. And of course, there's no human could match that kind of speed over that kind of distance. And you can read my book and catch the rest of it. But when you were next to them, I found that being around them was like being around humans who could, if they so chose, do things very quickly, including come around behind you. And so after a while I developed the habit that when they came in close, if there were individuals there that I wasn't familiar with, lots of times, as you see in my books, I retreat to the wall of the generator shack and stand with my back to the wall, just so they don't come around behind me, see? Going on to my next slide, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that people have in the question and answer session. Meeting the tall whites was always very emotional because we are naturally afraid of them. Just because they look different, they are different. Pretty much every man that I met who had seen them typically responded with fear, or at least a shock. This was the 1960s. This was before Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This was before the X-Files, anything. This was when flying saucers were supposed to be swamp gas. And so, one of the things that I had to do in order to survive out there was to overcome my natural fear of them. Now, I'm very religious. I'm Roman Catholic. My wife is Roman Catholic. How anyone does that without a religion is a mystery to me, because heaven knows I recited my prayers a lot of times, and I also used to have my song that I would sing when they came in close by Ricky Nelson, the song entitled "It's Up to You." It seemed to calm them. I don't know if it calmed them down, but it did wonders for my nerves, So one time I estimated that I had sang that song in its entirety more than 10,000 times, okay? I had it down to where I could do it even with the falsetto, it's up to you, you can't even do it once, you got to do it twice. Because I don't whistle in the dark very well, so I guess that's as good as I can get. But nights when you would hear them like behind my weather shack, or like one night when I was in June of 1965, when I was sitting at my ivory table plotting the winds with the door on the side of the weather shack was open behind me. The door in the front of my weather shack was open. There was a window on the wall behind me, and as I was sitting there, and I didn't have the radio up real loud, I just had it at a normal level. As I was sitting there, and of course I had the generator running, so I had my lights on, I could hear two people walking up through the sagebrush behind, to look at me through the window. Of course, I thought I was alone. I'm supposed to be alone. I'm the only one out there. It's hard for me to explain the terror that I felt. I was too afraid to turn around and look, like what I don't know won't hurt me, And what I did is I recited my prayers, the Our Father, the Hail Mary, a goodly number of times. And then as they were getting up to the window, I didn't have the guts to turn around and see who was watching me through the window. I decided that I would sing my little song and pray that God made them go away. And after a while, they went away, and I felt like God had answered my prayers. They are as naturally afraid of us as we are of them. I know that used to surprise me. I used to have a joke. I used to say, the world I live in is so unusual. They come here with the technology. They come here faster. They know I'm here, and they're afraid of me. What about that doesn't make sense? But the new arrivals who came here would typically want to see a human, and the experienced tall white aliens would typically bring them around, to show them what a human looked like. They would show them me. You know, I guess it's because I was the closest one and the one that was out there. Lots of times they would take the new arrivals into the town of Indian Springs, which is off base. Many nights when if I were sitting out, say like at 12:30 or 1 in the morning, as a weather observer, you get used to working all 24, around the clock, all 24 hours. So you work the night shift just like the day shift. So many nights, I'm not afraid of the dark. I would be out down by the hamburger stand. Indian Springs didn't have a casino in those days. It had a hamburger stand at that place where you now see a casino. You'd see the experienced tall whites bringing in groups of new arrivals and taking them up and down the streets of Indian Springs, where they would look in the windows of the houses and they would say, these are humans and here's how they live and so on. It took the new arrivals quite a bit of time to overcome their fear of humans. And so sometimes when the new arrivals came, some of them were afraid to approach me as close as 1,000 yards. I guess I looked that ugly, and sometimes, and it took them a while. Then they would bravely see if they dared come within 200 feet of me, and I would just be standing there doing my work. Some new arrivals were part of the technology exchange program that the tall whites had with the U.S. Air Force. And they wanted to get used to talking to a human before they met with the American generals and other American personnel. Of course, I'm the weatherman, and I'm just an enlisted man. I guess I'm the expendable human, I guess, from the general's point of view. And so lots of times, the tall white, those tall whites who were part of the, I'm getting a little feedback here, who were part of the technology exchange program would come up and practice standing reasonably close to me within 10 or 20 feet, and not actually say anything, just get used to standing that close to the gorilla, I guess. I guess I look like a big hairy gorilla to them. And then after they got braver, they might say good evening and just kind of practice talking to a human. So when they went out, when later they would go out and talk with American generals and American scientists, they could handle they were ready for it. One day in '65, when I knew there was something unusual about the ranges, and I'd seen them here and there, but I still thought it was me. I still thought that there must be something wrong with the blood flow in my brain or something, or maybe there was a group of painters or range maintenance men that I hadn't met or something. It was a hot day in July, as I remember, and I went over, it was right after I'd finished the 12 o'clock run. As a weather observer, I'd take the first run at 4:30, then I could go in for breakfast. Then I would come back out and do 2 or 3 more runs, depending on what Nellis wanted. Then I could go in for the noon meal. And then I would come back out and do 1 or 2 more runs in the afternoon, depending on what Nellis wanted. And then I was off for the day. Since my orders said that I could never be inspected, no one could ever come out and ask me questions. If I was on the telephone and I was late for the run, no one could ever demand to know why. I would just say, this is me and I have the run. It's, figured to be pretty good duty. Everyone back at Nellis thought that the main problem was loneliness, and some days I kind of wish that I were a little more alone, because some days it seemed awful crowded, and it was, on this day, it was right after the noon run, and I decided to walk over to the Range 3 Lounge, because I'd see, and rest in the shade. Inside it was kind of cool. They had windows. They only had windows on the north side. They didn't have windows on the east side, the west side, or the south side. And so it, and it had a sidewalk out front and an overhang, and so it was like an oasis in the desert. It was quite a bit cooler than my weather shack. And when I went over there, as I came around the corner, because my weather shack was south of the Range 3 Lounge, so that meant that when I was in my weather shack, all I could see is a building with walls, because the windows being on the north side were out of view. And the only door was on the north side. When I came around the side, the northeast corner, where the windows are and the door was, I was surprised because the door was open. I felt certain that I had closed the door earlier in the day, and the windows were open. Well, I didn't really stop to think about it. I was walking and it was hot and I just kept on walking, and when I went inside, there were two rooms, and on my right is the dividing wall with another door to the second room, but there are no internal windows. All the windows are in the other wall. And I just kept walking over to the far corner of that room where there was a desk and a chair and a telephone. And I'd already gone past that door when I noticed that it too was open. And I remembered that I had closed it earlier in the morning. And so it just seemed natural to walk over to the chair and sit down. It was positioned in the corner of that room on the left, the one on the east side. And as I sat there, I could hear people in the other room, okay? Now, I suppose that they were just going to be maintenance men or something, range maintenance men called range rats, enlisted men like me. And I didn't want to go over to the door because, I was afraid maybe they'd be playing jokes on me and jump out and say boo or something. And so I sat down in the chair and began talking and saying, well, I can hear you guys in there. Would you like to play a little poker? This is me, Charlie, the range rat, the weatherman. And what was in there were three young, tall, white women about my age. And when I started talking, then they could tell that I was sitting in the chair at the far end of the room, and they decided to make a break for it, a break to safety, I guess. And so as I sat there, watching, the room wasn't very large. They were probably no more than 10, maybe 15 feet from me. The three of them went running out of the room on the western room, out through that inner door, out through the door to the outside, and kind of double timing, twice as fast as a person might walk. They were hurrying. And as they were going out the door, the last lady said to the first lady in English about me, "He's very ugly." And then they took off running, They were naturally afraid of me, And I remember sitting there thinking what an unusual world I lived in. Even my hallucinations think I'm ugly, And I didn't know what to do. I mean, I was expecting 3 Air Force guys to come out and say, "Hey, Charlie, let's play poker," And, so they are as naturally afraid of us as we are of them, and they have a very dry sense of humor. Before me, there were two weathermen who were stationed as a team out there. And the first one had been sent out there by himself, and he came back and said that the mythical Range 4 Harry had come, whom he described as a floating white radioactive horse, and it had scared him off the ranges. Of course, once you become terrified, even ordinary objects look unusual. But as I describe in my books, they did have a high-speed horse formation, which I can talk about later. And so there were occasions when groups of them, like 4 adults and 3 children, could stand side by side out in the desert and appear to be a horse, or at least from a distance you would think you were looking at a horse, if they were wearing their suits and their suits were turned on. Anyway, so to help him, they sent a second guy with him, and the second guy was supposed to always stand out at the theodolite and keep a sharp eye out for Range 4 Harry, while the first guy went in and filled the balloon and did the weather report. And then the two men had agreed that they would, some days one guy would be the lookout, and some days the other guy would be the lookout. And they'd only done that for 3 or 4 days when one morning the one guy was in filling the weather balloon, and the other guy was out at the theodolite, keeping a sharp lookout for Range 4 Harry. And they said that Range 4 Harry, and the guy inside was saying, "Do you see him? Do you see him?" And they said that Range 4 Harry, that was his CIA name, Range 4 Harry, he thought it was quite humorous because he thought, you know, he didn't have any hair in his arms, but he liked to describe himself as a big hairy monster, you know, and for him it was a dry point of humor. They say that he stepped out from behind the Range 3 lounge in an obvious fashion and said to the guy at the theodolite stand, "Do you see me? Do you see me?" You know? And of course, just to tease him, you know? And the guy at the theodolite stand panicked, the guy inside panicked, and that was the last day they went back out to the ranges. They took off running for the pickup truck and had to be replaced, you know? They were compromised, if you will, but, you know, from the point, and they said that as they left, Harry was just standing there laughing, you know, having a good time. And that's what the tall whites were like. The teacher, the lady whose CIA name was the teacher, when she was introducing the 3 children to me, the little girl was her daughter. One was a little boy who was thin for a human, but not thin for them. The one I called the tall, thin Einstein, he's the one that in my books measured every dimension you can imagine for my theodolite and its stand, and reported to his mother the measurements using English units. And he was very proud of his ability to measure things in English units. And then there was the little fat astronaut, the one who used to pretend to be me. He used to, yeah, he used to like to sit in my truck. If I made the mistake of leaving the windows down, he'd climb in, he'd float in through the window. And then he'd put my fatigue hat on backwards and pretend he was driving my truck and pretend he was me. And the first time he did it, I was, as I described in book 2, I was standing out at the theodolite stand and I was thinking to myself, so this is what insanity is like. They were right, you know, it's quite painless. I'm not feeling anything, you know, as he's doing that, you know. I said, he looks so real, you know. I see why they need therapy, you know. If you had come to me on that day and said, here, I figured out what's wrong with you, Charlie, I'd have said, oh, thank heaven, I thought these guys were real and they were bugging me, you know. I was worried for my truck. When the teacher was introducing him to me, she said of the little boy, now he was not fat for a human. He was more like an ordinary human boy, but that is being somewhat fat or heavy set for an alien. And she was laughing. She was saying, he is the one that likes the food. And implied that the other children used to chirp like robins that, you know, and pretend the food didn't taste good, you know. And for her, that was like, you know, like their form of humor. And then they were all laughing, you know. They enjoy having fun, and that's one reason why you would see them in places like Las Vegas, Nevada. They were bored, they wanted to enjoy themselves. After I got to know them, each one was an individual. And so when you'd say, what would you talk to them about? The answer is whatever they wanted to talk about, and sometimes, like the men, had no desire to talk at all. But it's just like talking to the people in New York City. You'd say, what do you talk to the people in New York City about? And the answer is whatever they want. You know, whether they're the taxi driver, the Wall Street stock market man, the guy running the Staten Island ferry, they were just like that. Each one was very proud of the fact that they were individuals, and each one enjoyed humor. Okay. Many people, I'm going to quote here from Paula Harris in her book, Connecting the Dots. And in order for me to accept the fact that they were here, they were real, and I had to deal with it, it took me more than 6 months, as I say, and then I had to go and rethink my values. I mean, I'm Roman Catholic. God made the world. Some nights when you were looking at them, they love their children, they love each other. Sometimes it seemed like you were looking at the qualities of God. For example, the tall white mothers, when they came with their children, might typically begin the conversation by saying to me, do you understand that we love our children more than human mothers love their children? And I would say yes, and then the mother would feel comfortable. It was almost like the mother was saying, I want to make sure you don't harm my child, you see. On the other nights, sometimes when tall white women would come with children, and they would want their children to play while I was releasing the balloons, just so the kids could have fun, if the mother didn't say anything, in order to protect myself, I might typically begin the conversation by saying, I understand that you love your children more than human mothers love their children, and the mother would say yes, and then the mother would relax and feel safer around me. It was very common when they came for the women to point out their family relationships. One night the teacher came and pointed out to me that the guard they had stationed on the tower was her mother's sister's son, you see. And if there was any, connectable, genetic family relationship between them, they would almost always point it out, especially the women. The men weren't as talkative as the women, but if there were family relationships, they would express them. They might say, this is my brother, this is my cousin, and so on. They never came to teach me anything. Every time they came, it was for their purposes. In order for me to learn these things about them, I had to figure them out for myself. The Air Force never gave me a briefing, never showed me any classified documents. The tall whites never came to teach me the secrets of the world or anything like that. They came for their purposes. If their purposes did not require them that they talk with me, they might not. It was on many nights I might be out there at the theodolite stand tracking my balloon, and say an experienced guard and 3 new tall white men who were part of the technology exchange program might step out, and they might just want the new tall white men to practice standing close to a human man doing his work. From their point of view, that did not require that they say anything. On many nights, they might walk out, not say hello when they came, not say goodbye when they left, not say anything in between, Might just come and stand 10 or 15 feet around me watching what I was doing, and when they were happy, they might leave. And everything I knew from that encounter, I would have to reason out myself. When I went in the Air Force in July of '64, the Air Force gives you tests. And I got a perfect score in convergent, divergent reasoning on those enlistment tests. I also got one wrong on the math ability test, one wrong out of 500. It was the one I was marking as they were jerking the paper out of my hand. So I was saying 10 seconds, that's all I need, 10 more seconds, and I'd had them all right. Originally, I was supposed to be in a security job. Originally, I was supposed to be sent to radio intercept analysis school at San Angels, Texas. There was me and 2 of my friends who were in that group. And so in '64, the Air Force went out and got a top secret clearance for me while me and my 2 friends waited in PATS standing at Lackland. And if my orders hadn't come through, I would have been given my weather school orders. If my security clearance came through, then I would be given the orders to RIA school. But my orders were so classified even at that time that my orders for RIA school were locked in the safe. One of my friends, who also in PATS status, worked in the orderly room, in the day room, where the squadron commander, a captain was. The captain was supposed to give out the orders. And on the Saturday when the orders came in, I did receive my clearance. My 2 friends received their orders to RIA school. My friend, thinking that mine hadn't come in, thinking that it would have come in the same packet, thought that I should have been given the weather school orders. The bus leaving for the weather school was leaving that night, so my friend gave me 2 copies of my weather school orders, not the captain as was supposed to be. I had these orders on me, and I went to Chanute, and I'd been there for almost 2 months, and I wasn't getting paid. And so I went down to the, I went down to the accounting office and said, how come I'm not getting paid? And they were appalled that I was on Chinook Air Force Base. The next day, when I was in weather class, 2 MPs came with the dog and said, we need to speak to Airman Hall, and took me over to the Chinook Air Force Base commander's office, and they marched me in front of the general. And the general said to me, he said, Airman Hall, if you have a copy of orders saying that you are supposed to be on this base, then you are a happy man, and the captain who gave them to you has my personal reassurance of 5 years in Leavenworth. You are too valuable to be wasted in this school. On the other hand, he said, if you do not have a copy of orders saying that you are supposed to be in this base, then the captain is a happy man, and you have my reassurance of 5 years in Leavenworth. You are too valuable to be wasted on this base. I had 2 copies, and it was with great speed. I said, you can read those, right? I made sure he could read those suckers. And that's how I, I got paid then, and that's how I that's how I ended up in weather school. Well, and so when I say that in order to decide on these facts, I had to put 2 and 2 together, well, it served me well over the years, that reasoning ability. One of the things that I had to come to grips with was the religious implications, because I'm Roman Catholic, and like when the women, for example, were talking about how they loved their children, and it was obvious the men loved the children just as much as the women loved the children, but they weren't as expressive. It seemed to me like I was looking at a quality that God had. And so I have some observations here about the tall whites, and I'll begin by quoting from Paula Harris, Connecting the Dots. I'm quoting from page 46 and 47, where she is interviewing Monsignor Corrado Balducci. And you can read it on the screen, where she says, can you quote, Paula Harris asks, can you quote some church fathers who suggest the existence of life on other planets? And Monsignor Balducci responds, yes, there are several. Don Andrea Beltrami, the Salesian father and servant of God, prayed for the inhabitants of other planets. Of the 16 booklets he wrote, one seems to deal with this topic. The second is the recently sanctified, and I see I'm down to 19 minutes, so I need to hurry, Senior Padre Pio. Monsignor Balducci, quoting Pio, said, we earthlings are nothing too. The Lord certainly did not limit his glory to this small earth. On other planets, other beings exist who did not sin and fall as we did. Then Paula Harris asks, is it a grave mistake to think that you are the official voice of the Vatican? And Balducci responds, these ideas are not mine, and I do not represent the Vatican. The Vatican, however, I'm told that the Holy Father, Pope John II, has seen me on Italian TV several times and follows my radio homilies. If there were some objection, I'm sure I would know. You can catch the rest of the interview in Paula's book. It's very well done. Now, I have some observations. The first one is that the situation today is the reverse of the one that Galileo found himself in. Then religious thinkers and philosophers thought inside a box. Today it's the scientists and politicians, the scientists and the astronomers and stuff, who feel constrained by this box of physics referred to as Einsteinian physics, and they're not willing to think outside the box. The deep spacecraft that I saw the tall whites arrive in unquestionably traveled faster than the speed of light and used additional physics unknown to Einstein. I never saw anything that would lead me to believe that the aliens were supernatural. I never saw anything to believe that they seeded our planet, that there was no indication they ever wanted to create hybrids. They were quite happy being the way they were. I never saw any indication that there were wormholes in reality for a spacecraft to travel through, or that I never saw any indication that the aliens traveled forward or backward in time. However, their craft did routinely travel faster than the speed of light, just as airplanes routinely travel faster than the speed of sound. Now, I have a master's degree in physics, and I've copyrighted a paper that I entitled Hall Photon Theory. I included it in the appendix of Book 3, Millennial Hospitality 3, The Road Home. Everything in Book 3, Book 2, and Book 1, everything in all my books is as true as I can make it. It's perfectly true. I changed only the names of the people and the places. The science is true as well. I believe I understand how they built their craft to travel faster than the speed of light. Their deep spacecraft and their scout craft had a double hull construction, and the scout craft, for example, which was assembled here on Earth using parts provided them by the US Air Force, had, I estimate, 1,000 miles of fiber optics in between the two hulls. Alan J. Hynek was so close when he had that stuff he called slag from an aluminum furnace, because molten fiber optics looks like slag from an aluminum furnace. Now, because I'm down to 16 minutes, I'm not going to try to go through the physics of this. You see, I could talk forever, or certainly for 24 hours. But I believe that inside the photon, there's a third field. You know, a photon of light has an electric field, a magnetic field. I believe there's a third field that I call the starshine field. And if a person were to analyze famous experiments, such as the Michelson-Morley experiment, the water-filled telescope experiment, what happens in a toroidal coil, with an open mind and an inquiring mind, they would see this third field at work. And I'm happy to answer questions at my table and discuss it at any time with those of you who wish to. Remember that in physics, physical reality is defined to be a field that transfers energy is physically real. And therefore, see the toroidal coil, for example, where there's another field outside the coil, and as you can show with the diagram I just show, which is a famous experiment that everyone does in physics, that's transferring real energy, and therefore, by definition, in the world of physics, that should be a real field. Instead, they say it's the uncertainty principle. Now, I have here a map taken also from Jerry Zeitlin's website. It's a wonderful website. Like Paula Harris's website, there are places where you can get additional information. And it shows the major stars within 50 light years. It doesn't show the minor stars, and it's here on the screen. It's perhaps too hard to see from your distance. You should visit his website to get a better view. What it shows, though, is that the sun is at the middle of a bubble in space, and that the deep spacecraft, the tall whites with their deep spacecraft, in effect are island hopping across that bubble with the Earth as a major stop. Because I'm short on time, I'll skip forward to a quick summary of Hall photon theory. And this is a picture of the Eagle Nebulae taken from the Hubble Space Telescope. In summary, I feel that Hall photon theory describes that new branch of physics that I saw the tall whites use or utilize when they were building and designing their scout craft and their deep spacecraft, their suits that float, that allow them to float, and so on. And so everything in my books is perfectly real, including the physical apparatus, the hardware, the suits, everything in there is perfectly real and physically real. I felt that the American scientists could easily build anything that I saw in the desert within 100 years and maybe within 50 years. Because, if they would just sit down and look at physics the way it was, the way it is for real, and stop thinking inside the box, Einstein never claimed to have all the answers. Einstein never claimed to be perfect. But for some reason, the people who've come after him have claimed that he was perfect and had all the answers, something he himself never claimed. Einstein never claimed to be able to explain the water-filled telescope experiment. Yet for some reason, his followers pretend that he did and they didn't understand it, but he himself said he didn't. And when you go through relativity, there's nothing in there that would explain the water-filled telescope experiment. Proof right there that there's another field that can drag light sideways. Now, I do have 12 minutes remaining, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, until my time has expired. And so I guess I have time for a 10-minute session. I was hoping to leave more, but I guess I just enjoy talking about the subject so long. All I can say is I am what I am. But if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at this time, and I have 10 minutes to do so. Okay? Thank you. You're very kind. And I'll answer questions for 10 minutes, okay?
You have mentioned twice in your presentation that the main aspect of their coming here was that they're coming here for exchange of technologies. That there might have been secondary reason, but you've mentioned exchange of technologies twice. And I wanted to know what kind of technologies they could be interested in from us when obviously they are way ahead of us.
The tall whites come here so that they have a base to repair and refuel their deep spacecraft. The US government insists that in return for granting them a base, that there be a joint project or a joint technology program, okay? Now, the tall whites agree to that only where there's mutual interest. An example where there's mutual interest is in designing and building better radios to communicate between aircraft and the ground. From the tall white point of view, when their deep spacecraft land, if they need a better radio, it's easiest to just buy one from the US Air Force. From the US Air Force point of view, and Army point of view, they can always use better radios. So that was one area where I'm certain that they were in agreement. Another one was early on in '65 when the American generals and the tall white generals were bringing them through my barracks at night, and I thought when I saw them that I was just dreaming. On a number of occasions, the generals were standing outside the door on the tarmac on the north, and the American generals were talking with them, with the tall white generals, about joint projects. The American generals, and they're not in my books for various reasons, because I didn't want to do anything political or upset anyone. And the American generals wanted to be able to pick 2 young American officers, for which they offered to send me to the Air Force Academy and make me an officer, and put 2 officers on the deep spacecraft to go down to the next stop and see what it was like and come back and tell them. The tall white generals didn't think that was a very useful use of resources because they said humans wouldn't learn anything if they did that. The tall whites instead wanted a joint project. They said that around some of the nearby stars, a number of them, that there were planets almost exactly like the Earth, some a little colder, where they had not been able to establish bases because they're not builders, they can't work in the cold like we can. And that those planets did not have intelligent beings on them. They said that there was just plants and animals on those planets. And they said that if the American generals wanted, they could form a joint team, and the Americans could have the whole planet to themselves, and if the Americans would just build them a base that they could use, like the one they have here on the Earth, there would be a joint, they'd both have an interest in it. The tall whites would handle the transportation, and in the language of the way the tall white generals explained it, they would need supplies, and they promised to take the Americans with them when they went to the store for supplies. And they felt that by that process, the Americans would learn about the tall white culture, while building, in effect, a whole new Earth and a base for the tall whites on these other places. And that's the kind of thing the tall whites were interested in, you see.
Thank you very much.
I hope that answers your question.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. I've read the books, and I just had a couple questions. By your indication of, as you had observed a lot of the craft and the aliens out in the field, you seem to have excellent eyesight, because of the amount of distances you talk about, seeing and being able to distinguish American generals and whatever from very, so I commend you, you must have excellent eyesight.
When I was young, I had perfect eyesight. I had 20/20 with no astigmatism. In book 3, when I went into for a checkup, because I kept seeing the children right up close to me and behind me, and I thought there might be something wrong with my eyes, and they gave me a test. The colonel was screaming at me, expletives deleted. If I had eyes like yours, I could count specks of flymen around a wall at 100 feet. You know, I had near perfect eyesight. Of course, now that I'm older, you know, I'm not 19 anymore. But yeah.
Yeah. The other day, Dr. Flandern explained to us how he, about the difference between, if you're going to have a faster than light travel, that anything that would relate to the electromagnetic spectrums, or such as, you know, photons and all that you're limited by C. However, he mentioned that we have not yet discovered something such as a graviton or a monopole and all that, but that apparently the speed of gravity very far exceeds the speed of light. And I was just curious if have you been aware of any studies that have come up that give us a better handle on gravimetrics, other than things like inverse square law and that sort of thing? I mean, we can measure it, but we don't know what it is. And I was curious if you've heard of any research that has taken us closer to having a working knowledge of just what is gravity.
Well, the tall white craft had that double hull construction with coils. The outer set of coils, when they powered it up, was clearly intended to streamline the craft for travel faster than light. It also protected them from the forces of acceleration and deceleration. It, in effect, insulated them from the space around them. So as I saw on numerous occasions, once they powered up that outer field, the craft, if it were turned off, you would just see the craft. But once they powered up that outer field, the craft sitting out in the desert at a safe distance, say 3 miles, would fuzz over and just look like a fuzzy ball. It protected them from radiation and everything else. And then they could lift up, then when they could lift then the craft would float up till it was just 5 or 10 feet above the sagebrush. And they could travel a short distance, say like 7 miles, at an average speed of more than 8,000 miles an hour. I personally timed them, okay? And then stop and sit down. And inside, they were just sitting in a chair. They didn't feel the force of acceleration or gravity forces or anything when they were inside there. And see, so when we talk about gravimetrics, there's got to be at least one more field, maybe 2, and there's got to be a lot more to that whole branch of physics, because that third field must be able to create and destroy the electromagnetic field, and therefore that third field must be able to communicate with inside it by physical processes, and with gravity, it must be able to communicate itself at speeds greater than light. You see? Yeah. And so it wouldn't surprise me if gravity was traveling, if gravity could communicate at speeds faster than light, because I feel that whatever that speed is on that inner field, there must be another upper speed limit, you see? Other than that, I can't further answer your question.
Okay. Well,
yeah, but I hope that helps. If
Dr. Flandern, he expounded on that the other day, and
yeah. If you see in my book, my third book, the Hall photon theory is in the back in the appendix.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. In your third book, you mentioned another group of aliens that you had met earlier in Wisconsin. I was wondering if you could briefly tell us about them. You refer to them as the Norwegians.
Yes.
And whether you believe they and the tall whites are still here.
I'm certain they're both still here. In my third book, I describe the group of aliens I call the Norwegians with 24 teeth, whom I believe come here from Bernard's star or the next star out. They're so much like us that if my dentist hadn't pointed out the man out to me, that he had less that he didn't have 32 teeth like we do, that he had only 24 teeth, I would have never spotted him. I mean, he was perfectly capable of just walking up and saying hi, and you would have thought you were talking to someone from Norway who was speaking English with a European accent. I describe them in my book, and I'm down to 2 minutes, and so I want to be able to answer the next question, but you'll see them in book 3 along about page 82, okay? I've met at least 3 such individuals. Okay?
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Well, thank you.
You describe in your book that you observed that American generals, or big brass, would go literally on trips to the moon.
That's right, yeah.
With the tall whites.
That's correct. The generals did, I never did. Okay?
Right.
I was just an enlisted man, yeah. Okay. And I'll take this as my last question. I'm down to 2 minutes.
I'll try to make it really quick. I went to Pahrump and up that way on a vacation once with my parents, and there was this beautiful star playing games with us, following the car along for 70 miles. I have an implant, and I was telling my parents, oh, they're following us. They're playing with us because of this. I didn't know that that was the truth, but when we got to the motel, we stood out on the grass and we watched, and I said, no, really, watch this. I can make them turn out the light. And I thought about it, and the light would go out, and I'd think about it being on, it'd come on and off and on and off as I thought about it. Scared my parents. But my question is, do they do that because of an implant, or can they just do it with anybody through the mind?
They do it with electronics. They can read your mind with electronics. The furthest away they were when I saw them do it to me was on those times. They did it with me many times. But the furthest away they were was 1.25 miles. And usually they had to adjust their electronics because it differed from one human to another. And so, but the furthest away that I ever personally saw them do it was at 1.25 miles, in which case, when they were communicating with me, normal things like, not anything philosophical, and it didn't work very fast. It only worked at about half the speed that we normally think. But at 1.25 miles, it sounded like a radio going in and out of, losing the signal. But they do it with electronics. If they showed up without their electronics and they didn't speak English, you were down to hand signals.
My mother thought it was you guys, and she said, don't tell anybody about that implant.
I'm out of time now, and so I'm going to close now. I've greatly enjoyed